Hi everybody, I'm Chris. Welcome back to the Green Malt, and today I want to talk about an interesting little distillery and sherry finish release from them. It's Deanston Distillery, and this is their 10-year-old Pedro Ximenez sherry cask finish release. Um, Deanston is a Highland distillery, but it's one that until a year or two ago, I'd never heard of, knew nothing about them, much like Tam do. Until I just saw this in the shop and decided to give it a go on a whim, largely because this particular release is bottled at 57.5%. It comes with that 10-year-old age statement. It's not chill filtered. It's labeled as natural, and I don't know what that means, whether it's natural color or not, but it's got a lot of good things going for it right off the bat before you even crack the bottle. So, you know what, it was sitting on the shelf at a reasonable price. Why not? On further investigation into Deanston to figure out exactly who the heck it was that I just bought a whiskey from, turns out they are from the Highlands, but they're from the very low Highlands. They're getting close to lowland territory. They're a few miles outside of Stirling, which is kind of in the Loch Lomond area, like a little bit northwesterly of Edinburgh. Um, they're in a building that's a couple hundred years old now. It was originally a cotton mill built in the late 18th century, right in that boom of the Industrial Revolution, and it stayed that way for close to 200 years. Until they decided, I guess, in the mid 20th century, when business took a downturn, that maybe it's a good idea to produce something else. So they converted it to a distillery. So it's been producing whiskey now for close to 50 years, I think, 40 to 50 years anyway. And quite a lovely looking building. Interesting in that they produce all of their own electricity. They're a very green-centric producer. In fact, after powering all of their own buildings, apparently they sell back 75% of the energy that they produce on site from hydroelectric generators. So interesting little tidbits about Deanston. They're also very closely located to Stirling Castle, so if you ever go to visit this distillery, do make sure you visit Stirling Castle because it's absolutely beautiful and you won't regret it. So, anyway, they also produce not very much in terms of quantity. They only have 4 stills in the distillery, and they produce only 2 whiskeys that they label as their core range, a non-age statement virgin oak series of whiskeys, which I've not tried. Just don't really feel compelled to try too many non-age statement whiskeys these days. And they have a 12-year-old release that's bourbon aged, or bourbon cask aged, I should say. Also not tried, but I would definitely be willing to next time I come across it. Other than that, they produce a lot of limited, sort of experimental sounding releases, a lot of various cask finishes, wine, sherry, and otherwise at varying ages, and they sound interesting. Having tried this, and this is one of those limited releases, which I understand has now been archived, which is a bit of a bummer because I've almost finished this bottle now, as you know, maybe you can see. It's very sad. And I do hope they bring it back, because right now it doesn't seem like they are. What else? I talked about the ABV. It's quite high. I've had this sitting in the glass already. This is take number 2, and I poured myself quite a generous little shot, so I've watered it down to about, I don't know, somewhere around 40 to 43%, probably. Somewhere where it's, you know, takes an edge off that burn. I do like stronger whiskeys, but I want to be able to taste the more subtler flavors of the spirit, hopefully, and I don't want it all just be blasted with raw alcohol. So I have watered this down already. Definitely needs it. But this is a whiskey that will compete against the other sherry bombs on the shelves, right? I mean, famously, the Aberlour Abanad is kind of I think, the king of the hill as far as non-age statement sherry bombs go. It's an excellent whiskey. I've done a review of that in the past. One of my favorites. There's no question about it. I think this stacks up very favorably. We'll talk about that. And it's also like a Glenfarclas 105 type competitor. But unlike both of those whiskeys, this does have an age statement on it still. Even if it's only 10 years old, I'd rather see that than nothing. So, anyway. Enough of that. Let's see what this whiskey's all about. Yeah, and the character of the Pedro Ximenez is huge. Like, it it's an absolute punch in the nose type of character. And even more so than the Aberlour and the Glenfarclas I talked about. Like, it's massive sherry character. I read some comments about this whiskey, especially when I was trying to figure out who the heck Deanston was. And it seems like maybe that the distillery might have had a bit of a checkered past as far as quality of production, and okay, so be it. Some of the thought around this particular whiskey, along with some of their other limited releases, the cask finishes, is that, hey, you know what, they pulled up a cask after 8 years in the bourbon cask and realized that this is not aging well, it's not turning out, maybe we should dump it into an overly seasoned Pedro Ximenez cask and let the big sherry character just mask all those deficiencies that reside in the whiskey and release it as a cask finish. And you know what, maybe that's the case, but no producer is ever going to hit 100% out of the park when in terms of quality of whiskey. Like, you produce the best distillate you can, you lay it down in a cask, and you hope the casks are of good quality, and you hope the conditions are good, and you know what, you got to let the spirit do its work for 8, 10 plus years and see what comes out the other side. And for all of that, some of them just aren't going to turn out. So if you can take a subpar product, and I'm not saying that was the case here, but this seems to be a prevailing thought. So if you can take a subpar product and turn it into something that is quite lovely, in fact, why not? I mean, I don't think that's something you should hold against the producer. But anyway, rant over. So like I said, big sherry character, lot of toffee and caramel, honey, and dried fruits like fig and raisin, no question about it. I'm trying to think. It's interesting because generally with a lot of sherry finished whiskeys, there's a greater breadth of fruit, darker fruit, sometimes red fruits. It's punchy, there's no question about it. It's big, but it's a narrow band of profile. Very in your face, but very much indicative of raisin and fig, and not a lot else, at least not in the nose. I mean, you get a little chocolate, pardon me, and a little bit of a cereal note as well, but beyond that, the sweetness and the dried raisiny fruits definitely carry the nose. Yeah. The other thing that you'll pick up on immediately if you taste this whiskey is, like, the immediate arrival. It's rich, it's syrupy, it's hefty, and it's sweet. So if you're not into sweet whiskeys, or you're not into whiskeys that have a little bit of that thicker, syrupy mouthfeel, yeah, it's not going to be for you either, I'm afraid. If you like it, you'll love this. Much like the Aberlour, actually, in that respect, as far as the mouthfeel and the syrupy nature of it. It's sweet, the toffee's there, the caramel's there immediately, those dried fruits are there, but it dries out through the development. And then you get a little bit of the nuttiness coming through. It's like an almond and a hazelnut nuttiness. You get some of the chocolate, a dark chocolate, but not a bitter dark chocolate. A little bit of vanilla, a little bit of cereal notes, and a little bit of spice. Kind of like a cinnamon baking spice kind of note. And it dries out through the finish too. It dries out big time through the finish, and you're left with that nuttiness, and you're left with a little bit of that spiciness. It's not a long finish. It doesn't let you down too terribly. It's punchy, man. I mean, I can see where the notion of trying to mask a spirit with like a big, heavily seasoned sherry cask comes from. And I wouldn't want every whiskey to be aged that way. I mean, there's some certainly where you want to get a little more subtlety, a little bit more depth of the spirit itself. But you know what? For weather, and I know you can't see it there, but believe me when I say there's a lot of snow and it's damn cold out there. So for weather like this, a big, bold, warming whiskey is just I mean, it's lovely. It's exactly the kind of whiskey that I find I want to sip on this time of year. It's very much akin to a Christmas cake, not really, not in the North American sense, kind of like a British Christmas pudding. It's rich and it's dense and it's sweet. And if you've ever had a Christmas pudding where they put in those raisins and they soak it in some kind of booze, be it brandy or sherry or what have you, and you get it's baked, so you get the vanilla and you get the cinnamon and the nutmeg, and like all of those flavors are exactly the kind of thing you'll experience with this whiskey. It's a very cold weather, winter warming whiskey. Not something I don't think I'll be drinking on summer evenings, mind you, but for right now, it's beautiful. So, what would I want to rate this? I compared it earlier to the Aberlour release. I think it carries itself very favorably against the Aberlour, which I appreciate. It's a non-age statement, but it's the Abenad has always been kind of the king of the hill for me as far as those non-age statement cherry bomb releases go. And I can't for the life of me remember what I rated it out of 100 when I did, but I think I'd be hard pressed. I want to say 89, but I can't say 100%. I'd be hard pressed to give this much worse a mark. It's right there.